at number 10, the hacker. Let's start off our list with a creepypasta from the king of Fortnite creepypastas himself, fliplascript. This is the story of a 25-year-old who begins his narration by discussing how his generation gets a bad rap. He reveals that he's a hacker who typically does low-end schemes, taking small amounts off of debit or credit cards. But one day he decided he wanted more of a challenge and decided to set his sights on Fortnite. Now, it wasn't about the money, it was more so about the notoriety. After hours of prep work, he managed to gain access into Fortnite, with the game mistaking him as an admin, which allowed him to ban whomever he wanted and to give whomever he wanted V-Bucks. So a thought comes across his mind. What if he created an account, added a crap ton of V-Bucks to it, and then sold it online? He could make a solid chunk of change. With this plan in mind, he decided to call it a night when something caught his eye in the system. A list of people's names who had been banned by Epic Games themselves. Curious, he took a peek. It was organized into categories. He clicked on the miscellaneous category and clicked on one player's name, Honshu, to see the details of their ban. It read that Honshu was permanently banned for slaying 5 players in real life. Honshu is a modern-day Bloody Mary and has not been arrested or caught yet and was suspected to be a hacker. Accidentally, the hacker had said Honshu's name 3 times in a row, having read the description out loud. That's when he heard someone whispering behind him. Our narrator turns around to see his door slowly opening, silhouette of a man standing there in his hallway. He had a knife. His mask had pixels on it. He walks over to the narrator, puts the knife on his throat and says, "Make that the slangs of 6 people." And at number 9, we eliminated you. This creepypasta is a take on another classic Fortnite creepypasta. So the narrator comes home from school one day and decides to hop on Fortnite. As he's playing a match, he keeps seeing other players who have the name "We eliminated you" as their username. They were all wearing the same Cuddle Team leader skin. Now, staying out of the way, he watched as all of these Cuddle Team leaders fought their way through one another. Despite trying to stay out of the fray though and wait for the opportune time to jump into the action, he was eliminated, seemingly out of nowhere, taken out by one of the users named "We eliminated you." Pissed off, he was about to start up a new match when he received a strange text message from an unknown number that read, "Get ready for your final elimination." That's when he received another text. It was a picture of his house. He called the cops. When he looked outside the window, that's when he saw him, a man across the street looking directly at him wearing the Cuddle Bear leader mask. The narrator went to hide when he realized that his back door was unlocked. Taking a chance, he tried to sneak downstairs only to come face to face with the Cuddle Team leader. That's when the police arrived, tackling the intruder to the ground. And at number 8, the Sphere. This one is about the Sphere, the giant floating ice sphere that exploded over the island and left it covered in snow and zombies. Now, the narrator of this story tells about a unique and creepy experience that he had when the Sphere first appeared in the game. He says that the first time he logged into the game, when the event started, he was surprised to find himself watching a terrifying cutscene of Polar Peak. The Sphere started to move around to all of the places that the cube had previously corrupted. Now, when it returned to Polar Peak, he saw a frozen cube emerge from the castle there, looking utterly destroyed. That's when the most terrifying thing happened. The cube fused with the Sphere, with the Sphere rising up, exploding, destroying Polar Peak entirely. The castle was in pieces and blood was everywhere, with corpses of players lying around. What was this? Surely this wasn't intentional and put in the game. From there, the game loaded up and everything seemed off. The season read that it was season 999. The map the player was on only showed Polar Peak, marked up in red. Everywhere else was covered in lava. Having no choice but to land at Polar Peak, he made his way there. When he landed, he saw that the dragon eggs there were cracked. With the baby dragons dead, their corpses visible. He took a closer look, and that's when one of the dragons woke up. The player jolted backwards. The dragon tore off his character's head, killing him, and everything went black. And at number 7, the back bling. This one starts off with our narrator telling us that he was randomly gifted new back bling, an item called Voodoo Doll. It looked like his player character, but in doll form. Curious, he equips it and goes into a solo match. Now, when he gets into conflict, his back bling gets hit, and the player, in real life, feels a sharp, unusual pain in his own back. This continues to happen. Everything that happens in the game has a physical effect on him. Assuming that it's nothing but a weird coincidence that his mind is playing tricks on him, he just continues to play anyway. That's when he noticed that the voodoo doll on his character had blood dripping down its side. In real life, he lifts up his shirt to see a wound of his own, bleeding. He gets out of the game as soon as he can, and never looked back. And at number 6, Face to Face. Face to Face is another one from fliplascript. It follows the story of a player who was really excited about the Shogun being released. He had bought the same exact Shogun mask at his local game shop, putting the mask next to his nightstand thinking it was like the coolest thing ever. Now, after playing hours and hours of Fortnite that night, he decided to call it a day, only to realize that the mask he had bought was no longer on his nightstand. Instead, it had moved over to the chair next to him as if it wanted to be closer to him. Thinking he was just tired and imagining things, he put it back on the nightstand and went to bed. In the middle of the night, he awoke with the mask on top of him. Thinking that was strange, he just went back to sleep. The next day after work, he jumped into Fortnite, cleaning up in his first solo match. Feeling on top of the world, he headed back to the lobby lobby, only to notice something peculiar. The mask on his Shogun skin appeared to be a deeper, darker red color, as if it was kill activated. Blood started to drip from the mask. A noise that comes through his speakers, the drip drip drip. He decides to go into another match. The dripping noise grows louder. Strange. That's when he notices in real life that his mask is on the floor. Picking up, he's startled. There's blood all over his hands after he touches it. It too was dripping. Freaking out, he washes his hands, wraps a towel over the mask, and hides it in the attic, deciding that he'll deal with it later. He kept playing Fortnite, and as the hours went by, he begins to smell something, a coppery scent. That's when he hears the dripping noise again. He looks up. His ceiling is dripping blood. The narrator goes up to the attic, retrieves the mask, and takes it outside to the fire pit in his backyard and sets it on fire. When he returns to his game, he sees that his Shogun skin no longer has a mask on, as if the two were linked. That night, when he drifts off to sleep, he dreams of the mask, learning it was built from the bones of victims in the samurai era, painted with the blood of those victims. He wakes up and can't see. He touches his face. The mask was on him. He tried to take it off, but it was stuck, and then he hears a voice say, "Thank you for your body. It will serve me well. I'm glad we can meet face to face." And at number 5, The Laughing Man. The Laughing Man, despite having some major sound issues, is a pretty decent creepypasta from YouTuber Funtime Flash. The story starts off with the player describing how he and his friends encountered a terrifying player added to their squad who had a sinister laugh, one that was quite unsettling. They eventually finished that match and hopped on another squad one, thinking that there was no way they'd ever see this guy again. 4 games later, he appeared in their lobby, and the laughing would not stop. They tried to leave the match, but couldn't. The narrator even tried to unplug his Xbox. That's when the Laughing Man started screaming, and the player got a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of him playing Fortnite. His Xbox then just shut off on its own. Slowly, the player went over to his window, and that's when he saw him. A man whose face was covered in horrific stitches. He stood there laughing. The player called the police, locking all of the doors and windows in his house. The man started banging on his window, and his Xbox just turned back on. The laughing was even louder than ever. Finally, the police had come. He looked outside to see the terrifying man was being put into handcuffs and towed away into the back of a cop car. He later found out that this man had been stalking kids on Fortnite. Up next, number 4, Wrath of the Ice King. This creepypasta comes from Mr. Gruesome on YouTube. The Ice King ruled over his land as a dictator. He was hated, and if anyone did anything against his authority, they would receive some sort of severe punishment. Now it was decided amongst the Ice King's closest advisors and subjects that the only way people of Fortnite could ever live in peace was if the Ice King was assassinated. They decided to target him when he was his most vulnerable, when he was sitting on his throne on top of Polar Peak. His subjects quietly killed all of his guards one by one, and with his defenses low, entered the throne room confronting him. The Ice King laughed at his subjects, declaring that there was no feasible way to kill him. His subjects all attacked him. One by one, he laughed at them, snapping their necks, slicing them in half, and sending his ice hounds after them, who tore at their flesh. The very last subject who remained standing of the 6 tried to run for his life. The Ice King caught him and then beat him to a pulp. The next day, he addressed the people of his kingdom, threatening death to anyone who committed treason and that their families would be brutally sentenced to death as well, facing the wrath of the Ice King.
Number 3, Not a Noob. This player decided to play some Fortnite because he was bored. Spoiler alert, a lot of these creepypastas start with people playing Fortnite, obviously. The player themselves was level 41 at tier 34, so they were not really considered a noob, though they were known for being a camper, which in and of itself kind of makes you a bit of a noob when it comes to gaming. As they logged on, they looked to see if any of their friends were online, but unfortunately they were not. Just then their cell phone rang. They noticed it was a random number, and so they ignored it and didn't answer it. As they're playing the game, they ended up to get to a pretty impressive 13 kill streak. But the weird thing that they noticed was the last player they had killed in the game matched the random number on the phone that had been calling them. The other weird thing about this last character that they had killed in the game was that they had a creepy smiling man skin that they weren't familiar with, which was also wearing the same outfit as the player was wearing in real life. Just then their phone rang again with the same number. The person was obviously freaked out but decided to answer it. When they answered it and said hello, the response they got was, "I'm not a noob, I'm not a noob, I'm not a noob, I'm not a noob, you hear me." Obviously freaked out, they decided to hang up. When they looked back to their screen, they had noticed they had been killed by a player named I'm Not a Noob. At this point, they were so scared that they decided to just turn off the game and hide under their covers. Just then, their phone rang again. They tried to ignore the phone ringing, but it would not stop. They reached out from under the covers, grabbed their phone, and answered it. The same random number that had been calling them before had called them again, and when they answered the phone, they said frustratedly, "What do you want?" And the person answered with, "I want you to look out the window." When this player came out from underneath the covers and looked out the bedroom window, they noticed the same character from the game in real life. The same creepy, disturbing smile and wearing literally what they were wearing. Hesitantly, they asked into the phone, "What do you want?" And the person answered with, "All I want is to play Fortnite with you. And if you don't, I will be here, watching you, killing you." Freaked out, the player decided to call the police, but when the police came, they apologized, saying there was nothing wrong and that their brother had just played a trick on them. This player then went back online to play Fortnite, but repeated the phrase throughout the game, "I'm not a noob, I'm not a noob, I'm not a noob." You hear? Did that player become the other person? Who knows? Number 2, last one standing. While this player was waiting for the babysitter to show up at their house after their parents went out, they decided to go up to their room and play Fortnite. When they got into the match, they noticed that everyone had the Dark Knight skin. All of a sudden, all of the lights turned off in the house. Looking around in the dark confused, they noticed a notification pop up on their screen with a message from an anonymous user that read, "Why'd you do that?" Understandably scared, the player decided to go downstairs to lock the door. As soon as they locked the door, there was a knock at it. For some reason, they decided to answer the door. I wouldn't, but that's how the story goes. So they answered the door, but there was no one there. There was, however, a letter. They took the letter, opened it, and read it. It said, "Don't lock, don't look, don't lock, don't look, don't lock, don't look," over and over and over, with the last word on the letter being hide. At this point, completely freaked out, they decided to run upstairs and hide under their bed. All of a sudden, they felt a breath on the back of their neck. When they turned around to look behind them, they were greeted by a bunch of pairs of red eyes. This player's parents came home to realize that their child had disappeared and was never heard from again. Dun dun dun. Number 1, last right. Okay, prepare yourself guys, because this one is really scary. This player expressed that they decided to try Fortnite randomly one day and became completely obsessed. They put all of their money into the game, which when you think about it is strange because Fortnite is a free game, so how would they do that? Well, they confessed that they became obsessed with digital swag, spending tons and tons of money on digital swag. All of their money to the point that they actually maxed out thousands of dollars on credit cards. Wanting to focus on Fortnite 100% of the time, they also decided to quit their part-time job and quit college. At this point, they were the leader of a guild with over 100 members that was called the Masons. One of the members on the team, who was actually known as being one of their elite players, was Dr. Gruesome 666. The player in this story expressed that they were a little bit weirded out by DG, as they call him, short form for Dr. Gruesome 666, but they obviously overlooked a lot of the weird interactions they tended to have with them because they were such an amazing player on the guild. One of the things that they expressed concern over is sometimes when they were playing the game with DG, they noticed instead of saying anything, there would just be a lot of heavy breathing over the mic. But the player was really good, so they just wrote it off as being kinda weird. One day, DG told the player that they actually were going to leave Fortnite. Being one of the best members on the guild, the player was obviously concerned about DG leaving and asked why they were thinking about leaving Fortnite. DG told them that they had this new game that they had heard about, which was on the dark web, called Last Right. Last Right was apparently a Fortnite copy, but was much more violent and gruesome than Fortnite. The game itself involved parallel locations and maps, but ones that were spun as being a lot more dark, including a parallel version of Greasy Grove, which was actually called in Last Right Disemboweled Drive. The player also said that they were super excited to be playing with a new avatar in the Last Right game, which was called the Abortionist. They described this avatar as looking like a zombie with a ripped bloody smock, and for their back bling having a dead fetus. Pretty gross, right? The player at this point said that they did not believe DG and called them out as being a liar. DG then got super impassioned and said that they had actually only brought it up because they thought the player would be interested, and if they weren't interested, obviously they weren't as hardcore of a Fortnite player as they thought they were. Unable to pass up on anything Fortnite at this point due to their addiction, the player then agreed to actually play the dark web version Last Right. DG helped them out, sending them messages and getting them all the things they would need to start playing. Once they were ready to download the game themselves, DG sent them to a random numbered website, which if you're familiar with the dark web, this is how it works, a bunch of anonymous URLs. It started to load, and the player was greeted with a screen that asked them if they would like a male or female avatar. They decided, I guess I'll select male, clicked that, and as soon as they clicked that, they noticed the game start. They thought, wow, the graphics here are really good. It must be like 1080p or something like that. There was a naked man strapped to a table. All of a sudden, DG's avatar, which looked pretty real at this point, greeted the player with their real world name. DG then went on to list where they lived and all of these personal details that they knew about them. At this point, the player was pretty concerned and pretty confused, but it got worse. DG actually showed them their back bling, which appeared to be a real world dead fetus. And from there they grabbed a sharpened knife off of an operating table on screen. They then used the knife to cut off the naked man's face, put it on their own face themselves, and proceeded to ask if the player enjoyed their new avatar. Certainly freaked out, the player said, "I'm done with this, I'm gonna call the police on you, this is not okay," and was actually just traumatized. However, DG told them that they might want to think that through, as they were already on their way to grab a new avatar. They also confessed that the new avatar that they were about to go get was someone that the player may know, and revealed that the name of the avatar they were getting was Brad. Brad was actually the name of the player's brother, so obviously at this point they're freaking out. They decided to check their phone and started to dial Brad's number when they noticed they had a new video from him. They checked out the video sent through text and saw Brad with tape over his mouth and a black eye. At this point, DG asked the player to send a message along to Brad. The player asked what message it was that DG wanted them to send, and DG responded with that they should tell Brad goodbye. Number 5. Cutscene. So this story involves a player who logged in to play some Fortnite, and when they logged in, a cutscene started that was unrecognized by the player. This cutscene started with some screams, and they noticed the Recon Expert skin with Jonesy beside her. So it all started when a player logged in to play some Fortnite. The game started up with a new cutscene that was unrecognized by the player. The cutscene started with screams. Next, the player noticed that they saw the Recon Expert skin with Jonesy beside her. This was followed by the Skull Trooper skin torturing a Warpaint skin. Renegade Raider then appeared with the player themselves in handcuffs on screen. They announced that they would be punished for not being OG, and that the punishment for this would be death. Next, the player saw Renegade Raider pick up the scythe pickaxe and come down with it, covering the screen in blood. Since then, the player decided to switch to Minecraft and has had nightmares about the event. Every time the player wakes up from one of these nightmares, they notice a pain in their neck. The player actually suggests if you're playing Fortnite and there is a new cutscene without a new season of the game coming out, that you uninstall the game, or you could become the next of the OG's victims. Number 4. Dead Bear. This story starts with a sunny day outside. This player jumped onto Fortnite to play a solo match. They started the game as they normally do, mining trees, and in the distance noticed a little wooden house. They entered the house thinking hopefully there'll be some weapons in here, and fortunately did find a submachine gun. When they turned, they noticed there was someone standing there in a pink bear skin under the username Dead Bear, and they killed them. As soon as they had killed them, the screen turned to static for 5 minutes. After that, the game turned back on and the players saw their character. They watched as they could not control the avatar, and it ran to the edge of the map and jumped off a cliff, eliminating themselves. The screen then turned off, and when it came back up, there was a poem on it that read, "Roses are red, violets are blue, one is dead, and so are you." Freaked out, they decided just to go to bed. However, on their way to bed, what they noticed as they looked out the window was Dead Bear was standing outside holding a knife.
And at number 3, Trog Terror. Another one from fliplascript at this number. The narrator tells the story about the real danger that comes from spotting the Yeti in Fortnite. Now, he was at level 71 of that season's battle pass, and he had managed to unlock Trog, the awesome Yeti skin in the game. Excited, he eagerly equipped him, only to swear that he heard Trog speak, saying something the likes of "Trog go home," over and over, as if it were a taunt. The issue was, though, our humble narrator soon discovered that he was the only one who could hear what Trog was saying. Now, a few days went by with the player unlocking more levels in the battle pass. Nothing out of the ordinary. But one morning he woke up early and decided to play Fortnite before work. He noticed that Trog was talking again, now saying something different. Trog must go home. After googling it, he discovered that there was a hidden Yeti cave in the game, and perhaps he'd stumbled on the beginnings of an Easter egg. He was wrong. Not really in the mood to complete a challenge, he decided to just equip his Raven skin instead. But when he got to the lobby, he was wearing the Trog skin. Weird. It kept saying, "Trog must go home." Eventually, growing tired of this, he sought out the cave. When he arrived, he was shocked to see Trog take over his character. Trog entered and went up to a part of the cave and started shoveling snow, revealing a cold body, another Yeti. Trog then split from the character, turning the character into a default skin. And Trog, well, he didn't look like he normally did. Instead, he looked like a demonic, bloody Yeti, covered in red stains. He turns to the character and says, "You're Trog's dinner." The body of the other Yeti comes to life and the two of them begin to feast on the character's body. The story ends with the narrator warning others to not go into the cave with Trog equipped. Otherwise, you'll die.
Number 2. The bloody skin. Getting home from school and getting bored of his homework, the victim of this Fortnite creepypasta decided to fire up their Xbox and get playing. The Fortnite loading screen started up, but it was strangely all red. Still, the player decided to continue playing. He was retreating from another player crouching behind a wall when he noticed another player coming at him, and a skin that he had never seen before. The skin seemed covered in blood. His clothes were dripping red, and he was holding a giant bloody butcher knife. The player was frozen with fear. Suddenly, the bloody avatar rushed at them and stabbed them in-game, killing them. He heard someone whisper his name behind him, Andrew. Spinning around, he saw the same bloody skin from the game standing behind him in the darkness of his room. Terrified, he listened as the skin spoke in a deep voice, threatening him to win a match of solos or die, brandishing the same bloody knife from in-game. Andrew speedily turned around and jumped back into the game. All sorts of skins were in the game, Sidewinders, Cuddle Team, Calamities, but all of them were just covered in stab wounds with slashed, bleeding necks. The game came down to him and one other player. Andrew shot at the player and hit, but somehow his hit did not damage. "Not possible," he muttered as he watched the other player headshot him. Terrified, he slowly turned around to look behind him, but the bloody skin was gone. Andrew hasn't played Fortnite since. Number 1. Maddox. This story warns of the dangers not just of playing Fortnite, but of playing any game online, or doing anything online for that matter. The player was having a sleepover at his home with his best friend, and excited because his basement had 2 TVs, so the two could play Fortnite together. His friend brought over his Xbox, and they got playing. The two squatted up and decided to play some PvP battles. While in game, they noticed a player named Maddox1244, who was talking on a mic. He had a very high-pitched voice, and what sounded like a really low quality mic. The two friends decided to start talking to him, but before they could start a conversation with him, he immediately asked for their Instagram usernames. The two claimed they didn't have Instagram, smartly not wanting to share their personal information online. But Maddox would not back down, and kept demanding their Instagram usernames. It got so annoying that it was messing with their in-game focus, so the players decided to mute Maddox. They continued to play and got to a point where Maddox had been eliminated, but was still in the game chat. Curious to see what he was saying, they decided to unmute him. Maddox was screaming at the top of his lungs. He demanded their social security numbers and personal information. The player's friends started to get freaked out and declared that he was going to mute Maddox again, and the other player agreed. But the two friends found themselves unable to mute him. They smashed the controller, mute, 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 but it would not respond. Maddox started yelling obscene threats at the duo. They were at this point so distracted and freaked out that they died in the game and ended up back in the lobby. Oddly, they noticed while they once both had a decent amount of Fortnite currency, they now both had 0. They tried to shrug this off as maybe an in-game glitch and that it would probably be resolved later. Instead, they decided to play some other games for a while. But when they went to their Xbox game library, all the games they had were named Maddox. The player looked down to their phone where they had an Instagram notification. They had a new follower, Maddox1244, and a new message from them. The message read, "Found ya. Scared yet?" Suddenly, the player got a video call from Maddox. Reluctantly, he answered his phone and was greeted by Maddox, his face partially illuminated by a single flashlight. "Scared yet?" he asked as his body twitched and twisted in an almost inhuman way. His eyes rolled back into his head and he began to convulse and scream. The player's mom came downstairs and urged him and his friend to keep it down. He promised they would and apologized, not wanting to admit what was really going on. He then noticed another video call from Maddox, but despite not even answering it, it just went through. In the corner of the screen, he noticed a window. Maddox was outside. Suddenly he realized it was his living room window, and that it was open. He ran to his living room with his friend close behind him. Both of them were freaking out and close to tears. They ran into the living room and slowly creeped over to the window. There, outside in the dark, was a boy, twitching. They screamed. The player's mom and dad both came running into the living room and also saw the boy standing outside. They immediately called 911. By the time the police got there, there was no trace of Maddox, and his Instagram and Xbox account seemed to have vanished. Number 5. The Forgotten Location. Many people know that Fortnite Battle Royale has changed over time, with different seasons of the game changing maps and content, which means that many will not remember the location that this player recalls. This was a map called Torture Town. The player claims that this location only existed for about a week in the game in Season 0. The player claims that the location was hated for a few reasons, one being that the loot was terrible, but the other being that it was an ultra-realistic torture house. The player tells of a time they remembered dropping there with their friend Jack. The location was usually reported by other players as being far too dangerous, as it was covered in spike traps, which would also spawn all over the place, and if you were ever there for longer than 5 minutes, it would randomly generate you somewhere else. This map was covered in corpses, many of whom came with weapons that were loaded, which was odd. Even more odd was that the guns were almost fully loaded, but not quite. They were missing exactly 1 bullet. And many of the corpses on the map looked as though they had their heads blown off. The other strange thing is the map was super glitchy. If you died randomly, it would say that you took the L or you got slaughtered, and that's when you were not eliminated by another player. The player claims that this map no longer exists, but that it was also never meant to. So be warned, if you ever find yourself in Torture Town, you are now in a part of the game that does not really exist. Number 4, Chicken. This player was playing a game with his friend Alex. The two were in a game where 15 people were left and the player really felt like they were going to win. There was lots of good loot in the game, so they went to a nearby house in Salty Springs to loot it. They went down to the basement, but what they saw was something the player had never seen in game before. They found a secret room in the basement with a chicken suit. The chicken suit was lying in the center of what looked like a ritualistic symbol painted on the ground in blood. The suit itself was also covered in blood and surrounded by bloody buckets of chicken. The buckets looked as though they had been left there by worshippers of the suit, an offering of some twisted kind. The two friends were a little alarmed by this. It didn't seem like it was something that was supposed to be in the game at all. They left the house and continued searching houses in the nearby area. All the other houses appeared to have the same secret room. They decided to leave Salty Springs for Retail Row, now starting to get pretty freaked out. The player at this time felt like someone was following them in game, but shook it off as they didn't notice any other players doing so. The game was now down to 10 players. The pair took out another duo group, but at great cost to their health. They didn't have any medkits on them, but used a couple minis to patch up as best they could. As they started moving toward higher ground, the player noticed that in front of them was the chicken suit. It was holding one of the bloody buckets in one hand and a gun in the other. The chicken suit shot at Alex, and his friend just disappeared from the game. He called out into his mic, "Hey Alex, are you still here?" but heard no answer from him. The player shot again and again at the chicken suit, but none of his hits seemed to take any effect. The player decided to exit the game and just turned off his Xbox. Just then he heard a knock at the front door. He opened the door to see the chicken suit standing before him. Number 3, the unknown player. It was 12 AM when this player hopped on to play some Fortnite. They clicked on 50s but forgot to click no fill, so it ended up as a squad game. The player only had one other person on their team, oddly enough. The player asked the other person if they had a mic, but assumed they didn't as they heard no response. Surprisingly, the two of them ended up winning the match, with the player getting 4 kills and their silent teammate getting an impressive 15. Having enjoyed the match, the player tried to look up his teammate so he could send him a friend request and they could play again in the future. But when they searched the username, it came up as no results. This was a little odd. The player began to worry that something strange was happening when they received a message from a random user inviting them to play 50s no fill. While in the lobby, the player noticed this new teammate didn't have a mic as well. At the end of the game, the user that had invited the player seemed to actually change names from what they were originally to the username of the previous teammate with the 15 kills. Even more disturbing was during the game the player died, and they thought their game must have been glitching at the time because a window popped up saying, "We have 666 kills. Do not leave the match or else." The next day, the player received a letter in the mail from the apparently non-existent user. They immediately destroyed it and have not heard or seen from the other player since.
And at number 2, didn't stick the landing. This creepypasta tells the tale of a gamer named Jared, a talented player who had gotten his fair share of wins and kills. But he was only human. He got eliminated a lot too. Anywho, Jared is playing Fortnite when he gets a message from his friend who asked him if he'd seen the news about the mass suicides. Jared's like, "What?" And his friend sends him a screenshot of the news channel that he's watching. People are committing mass suicide without any explanation, jumping from high heights in particular. It's like Bird Box, but not. So Jared, just a little freaked out, just decides to take his mind off it by playing another match in Fortnite. That's when he gets a strange compulsion. As he's jumping out of the battle bus, he decides to land on the highest point on the map that he can. Once he glides down to a high peak, the compulsion gets worse. build. So he starts to build, up, up, and up, 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 and up, as if he's building a stairway up to the heavens. And when he's exhausted of all of his resources, he looks around the map, players and firefights, all the locations he had previously traversed with joy, and he jumps. He doesn't know why, he just does. And out of nowhere, as soon as his character hits the ground, he falls off his chair in real life. An intense pain rifles through his body. He's on the floor and he can't move. He just lies there, knowing that death is impending. Now, side note, this creepypasta is by Chris Hum and worth giving a watch. Rather than just using gameplay, it's told from a POV angle and it's actually kinda neat to see play out. And finally, in at number 1, Zozo the Demon. Zozo the Demon, our final one from fliplascript, is one of the longest creepypastas on our list today, and it's damn good. So it starts off with the narrator telling us that he bought the Ark, but felt duped. Now for starters, the skin, which is supposed to be female, was male. He also looked rough, having burnt armor and black frayed wings instead of, the gold armor and the regular wings. Now, backtracking a bit, the narrator tells us that a few days ago he stumbled upon a Ouija board. Having nothing to do, he decided to give it a go even though he was alone. After asking it a series of questions, nothing happens, exactly what he expected. He's about to put it away when it starts to move, spelling out the word Zozo. From there, Zozo continues to communicate with him. Being a cynic, narrator starts asking it questions that it couldn't possibly know the answers to. He asks it about his cousin who had died recently, to which it responds by spelling out the words drunk driver, which is how he died, in a car accident because of a drunk driver. Naturally, our narrator freaks out and puts the board away, tucking it into the attic. Trying to feel better, he googles Zozo, and turns out that Zozo is actually a real thing that other people had encountered. As he continues to read things about Zozo online, he comes across an article that makes him terrified. He never said goodbye to the spirit, he just put the board away, meaning he never severed the connection to him and Zozo. Now that night, he has a dream about Fortnite. He's wearing a new skin, a demon with charcoal feathers, who looks like he came right out of hell. The next day was when he saw Ark in the shop and bought her. After Ark appeared otherwise, he tried other skins instead, but the game would not let him equip anything else. It would always revert to this strange, evil-looking skin. Now the first match he was in, he died early on, but instead of being transported out of the game like usual by that robotic machine that collects you, his character, who he begins to call Zozo, turns around, facing him. Zozo jumps at him, filling up his monitor. Petrified, the player gets up and runs out of his room, only to trip on something in the hallway. Looking down, he realizes that the object that tripped him is none other than the Ouija board. It starts to spell something out on its own. You will die. Afraid that he needs to do something quick to stop his impending doom, he goes back onto Fortnite to discover that the skin no longer exists. Instead of Ark, the name that appears is Zozo, and the skin isn't even there, as if it had left the game. That's when he felt something cold on his shoulder. He looked up. It was Zozo in the flesh. Despite his presence, our narrator runs into the hallway, going straight to the Ouija board. He spells out goodbye. Zozo screams, trying to claw at our narrator, but he was starting to fade. Our narrator grabs the Ouija board, grabs some matches, and lights it on fire out in his backyard. Zozo, running after him, stops midair and basically explodes. The narrator goes back to Fortnite to discover that Ark has returned to what she should normally look like. That night, he dreams of Zozo and Fortnite. The demon tries to tell him that he can haunt him in his dreams, and that they're still connected. That's when our narrator remembers something. He didn't burn the planchette, just the board. And that's when he hears Zozo's horrific voice in his ear, "You will still die."